Hi, I'm Dawn Blattel, an artist and art educator from Ohio, and with a little inspiration from my students, I've actually developed a new way to glaze ceramics. You might be familiar with acrylic paint pours. Well, today we're going to talk about glaze pour paintings. I originally started on functional sculptures and bowls and things until I realized Mayco actually makes clay canvases. They come in different sizes and make fabulous surfaces for doing any type of painting on them with glazes. I'm just going to teach you how to do a pour painting with them and the wonderful glaze of Stroke and Coat. These are the first two that I created. They're both done with Stroke and Coat on the 8x10 canvases. They're the same color palette except for the change in white and black. I've learned lots of things, including to what level I need to thin the Stroke and Coat to make it move across the canvas successfully. I've also learned that while it makes a fabulous result in Stroke and Coat, you can also use the foundations glazes. So this is a direct color comparison of the two. Foundations, you can use it straight out of the bottle. It's thin enough to pour onto the canvas. With Stroke and Coat, I thinned mine, and I definitely want to recommend you thinking about your color choices because while these analogous color families work great together, some of your blending can look a little muddy on the more transparent foundations. In considering your color choices, with like a rainbow where some of the complementary colors overlap, you tend to get a muted tone. This is demonstrated in the foundations, where the vibrancy is much more evident in the use of Stroke and Coat. So, I'd like to demonstrate using a 6x6 clay canvas how to do a glaze pour. I've been practicing for about 6 months, so I'm going to show you some of the tips that made my life way easier so you don't have to stumble where I did. My first favorite trick that I borrowed from the acrylic paint pour world is to use tape to create a wall around my canvas. So that way you don't have as much like leakage off the side as you're working, and then you contain all of your glaze until you're ready to do the sides. I prefer to start with like one corner and whatever you have to hoist your canvas up. If you have a Lazy Susan, great. I'm just using a plastic bowl and going all the way around the edges of my canvas, creating a little barrier so my glaze won't escape until I'm ready for it. So if you do a pre-glaze layer down first, you definitely have to wait for that to dry for the tape to stick. So I'm going to be using these colors in Stroke and Coat. I have Tuxedo, Cottontail, Blue Yonder, Green Thumb, and Sunkissed. They were the ones that were used in my demo and have a comparison match in the foundation with glazes. I've already pre-prepared my pouring cup. While I did start just with a normal cup, I found these that kept my colors separate until I started pouring. So decide where you want to pour. You can do a straight pour, which is just holding your pour cup in one position and letting the stream hit the canvas, or feel free to move it to create other patterns. A straight pour is right down the middle like that, but I'm an art kid, so I like to be brave, and I'm going to make some other lines as I travel. The corners sometimes are difficult to fill, so make sure you leave some area for that. If your glaze seems like it's not wanting to move for you, a finger mister bottle is your best friend. I do not recommend a spray bottle though, because it will put down too big of droplets in the process. As I move my glaze around my canvas, I aim to fill the majority of the surface, though you don't have to get every spot, because when you spray and use a brush, you'll be able to fill in any small gaps. I did learn the hard way, if you leave a gap, it will definitely pull apart in the kiln. I do these at a low fire, but they can also be done at a higher fire range if that's your interest or you're working on stoneware. So now I get to think about gyroscoping or moving my canvas, but I'm going to fix this small little, oh, it's starting to do it on its own. If you have a gap, you can mist them and they'll disappear. I'm going to mist my edges because they're the parts that are resistant to getting the glaze. And then I'm going to start tilting my canvas. If I lean one direction and get that edge filled to a corner, and then work my way over. And then I'm tilting to get that corner filled. And you can allow it to stretch as much as you like. If you want a more distinct unstretched design, you simply put down more glaze in the beginning. Almost around to all of my corners. And then we get to address how to do the walls. A trick I've found besides for the tape is using a brush and the mister bottle to get the sides wet to begin. So that's what I have so far. I'm going to kind of readjust my image to the center and think about pulling off my tape. I personally really like to use these brushes because they happen to be the same width as my canvases, but any brush will do. And I'm also a big fan of having a little silicone cup or spare condiment cup around, because if you have somewhere that doesn't quite want to get covered, you can actually take your cup and pour into the silicone cup and get a little bit prepped for when you go to do your walls. I must admit, this is one of my favorite parts, is watching the glaze travel over the edge of the surface. So I'm going to start with my little tab, and I prefer to get my mister bottle back out and spray my edges so they are moist. Oh, and in the concept of glaze pour painting, you have a lot of excess waste as the paint pores. They keep dripping off the canvas. Because the clay is so porous, it holds on to the glaze and you have way less waste, which is something I'm big on anyways. All right, let's go ahead and pull the side. Tape be free. And you can see you get a small bead that starts to happen from where the wall was protecting it. And then I simply mist and tilt, and it starts traveling over the edge. I prefer to think about using a brush and getting that area evened out, and then it will continue to travel better. And then I work my way around my canvas. So I pull the next piece of glaze, mist, and brush. And if you get something where like the corner doesn't quite want to get covered, that's where I go ahead and use my little extra bit in my silicone cup, and I can encourage the difficult corners to travel over when I start pushing my glaze over. And around I go, following the same method. If you really want to stretch your glaze and get a finer design, having a layer of glaze on the canvas first can help, but obviously it's not necessary. And we are down to the last side, tape's off. And we can watch it take off down the sides. And I'm going to go back and touch up my corners. Touching up my edges so that I know I won't have rough, just bisqued pieces. And even my movement in spinning it around my hand keeps the color traveling on the surface. And then you get to be as brave as you want to and how far you stretch it. What design are you interested in? And how crisp you want your lines. The more you stretch it, your lines are going to get wider. And the more you leave it alone, the bolder your images will be. So there is a glaze pour painting. You see, not a ton of waste. And then I find something to set it on to let it drip and finish. And then I'm firing these at 05, but I said they can be done at higher temperatures. So, now that you've seen how to do a glaze pour painting, let me show you some of the supplies that I use to be successful at these. I prefer myself to thin stroke and coat by about 15%. The colors are very, very vibrant, but that's also time consuming. So you might choose to just purchase the foundations, which are already thin enough to use right out of the bottle and produce nearly identical results. I absolutely started with just using plastic cups that I kind of squoze and bent so that I would have a little pour spout. And I would just layer in my glazes and begin that way when I started my paint pours. You definitely want a really good brush to invest in. It makes a difference for your finishing your product. And things like tape and mister bottles are also going to make your life easier. While I've really enjoyed using the pre-bisqued pieces that Mayco has to use, I've also been experimenting with other clays, and you can do a once fire. So this little pinch pot was simply made and then glazed with the same method and put into the fire once to cone 04, and it absolutely produces similar results, though you may notice the little bubbles and cells. While people frequently try to get that in the acrylic paint pour world, if you like that look, the trick is to do it on a once fire, and the gases that escape during that process will appear through the glazes and affect their surface. They're totally still glazed, they just have a different finish to them. Here's a piece that I hand built and did a once fire on, and it has a beautiful finish, though you can definitely see where there were areas that were affected from the gassing off of the once fire. Major suggestion, if you're using stroke and coat or foundations and considering this, definitely leave a place where some of the gases can escape. It will produce a better product on your glazed surface. These are also 2 throne pieces that I did, and they were also once fired. Lovely finish, but I'm really, really glad that I put down a base layer first so that anywhere that it did gas off and make cells, I still have glaze. In closing, I hope you've enjoyed learning how to do a glaze pour. We're also going to do an advanced video where we talk about glazing unusual shapes or doing it at different cone firings. We're also going to talk about how to alter the surface before you start working on a glaze pour. I'm Dawn Blattel, and it has been a pleasure to share this with you. And remember, always make it Mayco.